Ambassador Emerson, welcome back to AICGS.
Thank you.
You're with us. You're here because we were celebrating here in Washington the 25th anniversary of unification. Let me ask you, where were you that night in November of 1980?
I was actually in Los Angeles. At that point, I was Chief Deputy City Attorney for the City of Los Angeles.
Wow. And
I can remember watching, we had CNN on constantly in my office, and that was one of the times when I just couldn't leave the television. I was absolutely glued to it. I'd been to Germany in '88 with the American Council in Germany and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and a Young Leaders Program, and I'd been there in '75 with the Aspen Institute when I just graduated from college.
Oh,
and so having gone through Checkpoint Charlie and had that experience twice, it was extraordinary.
Well, it is extraordinary, and it's extraordinary to think that it's 25 years ago. It's a blink of a historical eye. But here we are, and you're in the cockpit position in Berlin as ambassador, and you just have recently told me that it's interesting to see how Germany is beginning to respond ever more to not only partnership but also leadership. This famous speech from 1989 as well from George Herbert Walker.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think from your perspective, if I'm not wrong here, that Germany is stepping up to that leadership plate. And the 25 years of developing it since then with the United States has not only allowed it and encouraged it, but actually challenged it to be up there. If you look at the challenges that are out there that are testing German leadership today, what are they?
Well, to your point, the fact is that Germany right now, the leaders in Germany are really making an effort not only to play a role in international affairs that is commensurate with their economic power and their political influence, but even to punch above their weight. And you can see it on a number of issues. And the crisis in the Ukraine, with the Russian incursion into the Ukraine, the leadership role that the Chancellor in particular has played in trying to resolve that situation, their involvement in Afghanistan as a continuing member of Operation Resolute Support to try to help the Afghani people and security forces maintain the gains that were accomplished there, their leadership in dealing with the Ebola crisis in Western Africa and helping to rebuild, working together with the United States, trying to help rebuild the deteriorated public health infrastructure there. The unilateral decision that the German government made to send lethal aid to the Peshmerga in the wake of the ISIS movement in Iraq and Syria, that was unprecedented. That was an actual big deal. It was the first time that the Germans took action militarily apart from being part of a NATO or a UN group. The leadership that the Chancellor has shown through the G7 on the issue of climate change. And then again when the problems with Greece arose, the effort that the German government made, both Schäuble and the Chancellor, to both keep Greece within the Eurozone, but to do so in a way that helped maintain the integrity of what it meant to be part of the Eurozone, and now finally, obviously, playing a leading role in trying to deal with this refugee crisis, which is just swamping Europe right now.
I mean, in many ways, you think in terms of the fact that Germany has answered the old question, who do we call in Europe?
That's right.
And Berlin is more than likely the telephone number than even Brussels these days. But on the other hand, you have a woman who's been in power for 10 years. She's consolidated that for a decade. She's likely to go on even further.
Yeah, all indications are she runs for re-election in 2017.
She's a very popular woman and a very popular leader. But let me ask you this: we've been through a few hiccups with Germany on this land. Your watch, well, you've been there as ambassador. Certainly, you walked right into that when you took over, and the whole Snowden affair unfolded around you. Probably still some sparks left in that. But what's changed since then? What do you think has that debate or that argument with Germany, has that evolved any further?
Oh, it has evolved absolutely. When people ask me what was the biggest surprise that you encountered upon coming to Germany, without question it was the depth of the emotional level of the reaction to the disclosures about the Chancellor's cell phone. That was felt through all levels of government and all levels of German society, including the business community and people who are very, very sophisticated about these things. And what has changed is, I think, in the wake of Ukraine challenge, in the wake of the need of Charlie Hebdo and the Jewish delicatessen, and the recognition of the need that we have to work together in counterterrorism, in the wake of cyber attacks, whether they're in the Bundestag or the Office of Personnel Management or even Sony Pictures Entertainment, and the recognition that we need to work together to address those things, there has been an articulated point of view that German and American cooperation and collaboration on intelligence matters is of absolute critical importance to Germany's national security and to the well-being of the German people. And that was never really so clearly articulated when the Snowden information first came out.
And that might be changing now. And does the, ask you another, you mentioned Ukraine, of course. Chancellor Merkel and Germany has been pretty hard-nosed on keeping these sanctions in place, and I don't see that changing. But do you sense that there could be something happening that might change that? Russia is now involved in Syria. They're obviously trying to play that card and probably sort of distract from the Crimea and Ukraine. Is there any, shall we say, trend in Germany to say, well, maybe we ought to just sort of accept what happened there because he's now doing us a favor in Syria? Or do you think that they can balance these two things? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think that it's not clear that he's doing a favor in Syria in terms of the way he is addressing it. If you believe that the best way to deal with a refugee situation is to put an end to the civil war in Syria, and you believe, as we do, that the best way to end the civil war in Syria is first and foremost for Assad to leave, then it is not clear that we're having a favor done for us by actions that help, potentially to sustain his authority. Now, there's maybe a split view on that in Germany, but I think that there's a conflicted point of view among many in Germany about Russia. There are some that were opposed to sanctions in the first place, and yet there are others that really are committed to the concept of rule of law, and were outraged by what happened in Crimea and what happened in eastern Ukraine. But one thing is very clear to me, and that is that there really is not a link, and should not be a link, between Russia's behavior in Ukraine and Russia's behavior in Syria. And I believe that the leadership in Germany is not making that mistake either. Now, we had Russian involvement in the P5+1 process to come to develop the Iran deal. And that was good, and that was useful, and that was constructive. And there's no question that some of the political leadership in Germany is asking, can that be a model for dealing with other crisis points around the world? And that's certainly a discussion in Germany.
I mean, in many ways, a crisis is the way Europe has rolled over the last 50, 60 years. They go from a crisis, and then they take a step forward, a step backwards. This is, in a sense, many of the things you mentioned are opportunities as well as challenges for Europe to continue to find its unity and to some extent its capacity to act as a unit. But Germany is absolutely central to that. There's no other governmental figure that has the strength that Chancellor Merkel has. Look at the way England is drifting in its direction. The French situation is not exactly a picture of strength. That's why I come back to the Kissinger number. You call Europe, you call Berlin.
There's no question that we do have an answer to Henry Kissinger's famous question, and the answer is that she will be answering that phone. And I think that's there's no question for all the reasons that you articulated. But that's not to say that Germany and the political leadership in Germany feels that it needs to throw around its weight within the EU. In fact, what I've heard is almost the opposite. There's great sensitivity on the part of Angela Merkel and others in Germany that in working with the EU, that it is a consensus organization, and they needed to put the time and the effort and the sweat equity into building consensus around different policy ideas. So obviously Germany could be the 800-pound gorilla if it wanted to be. It obviously has great influence within the EU, but fundamentally in terms of the way that influence is exercised, the effort is to do it in a collaborative and a cooperative fashion and not not as a bully, if you will.
John, one final question. I mean, we're celebrating the 25th anniversary. I don't know the figure, but there are a lot of people that are 25 years old in Germany, and therefore they would have grown up without that wall. In many ways, people have argued that that means that the narrative, not only of Germany itself, but also, in fact, German-American relations, has to reflect that. The reference to the care packages and the freedom of Berlin and all of those things are pretty much in the historical annals. And when you talk and meet with your German colleagues, do you feel that that need is there, that there needs to be a narrative of German-American relations that obviously takes into consideration what we were able to do together in 1990, but needs maybe a set of new reference points now?
When I stepped off the plane to become ambassador in August of 2013, I laid out 4 or 5 priorities, and one of the priorities was just this point. It was that we, in an era where you have a whole generation, maybe generation and a half, of Germans who came of age, if not were born after the fall of the wall, for whom Luftbrücke, Ich bin eine Berliner, tear down this wall has no meaning in his ancient history, that we do need to build reasons for them to feel that there needs to be a strong and binding German-American relationship. And I think there are ample grounds for doing that. I think the economic relationship, I think the respect and admiration that many young people have, even as they're frustrated with some policies in America, like our gun culture, the frustration people have with Guantanamo, obviously the situation with the Snowden revelations was not helpful to this regard, and sort of was kind of kicked the sleeping dog of anti-Americanism that raises its head from time to time in German society. But notwithstanding all that, there's great admiration for the energy, the creativity, the entrepreneurialism that is reflected in America and really emblematic of, say, Silicon Valley, California, that kind of thing. And young Germans are very, very attracted to that. And there are deep cultural connections in terms of art, in terms of music, in terms of popular culture. And so I think there's plenty of a basis to build a new narrative and a relationship between younger Germans and Americans that's meaningful to those younger Germans. But at the same time, we need to keep reminding them about the fact that we do share the same values. These are 2 countries where freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom after speech, the ability to criticize your own government, the ability to challenge and run against the policies of your own government, and of course rule of law are absolutely core to the principles and values that drive our countries. And we need to keep reminding them of that. And I think that has to be part of the conversation and part of the narrative for quite some time.
I have a habit of saying, after kicking around this particular bilateral relationship for almost 4 decades now, that the sum is always greater than its parts.
I like that.
Appreciate it. Glad
Yeah.
to have you with us.
Thanks.
And, we'll stay in touch.
My pleasure, Jack. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.